When she first married into the family, everything felt like a dream. The woman was filled with hope, excitement, and the quiet nervousness that comes with entering a new chapter of life. She wanted nothing more than to build strong bonds with her husband's family, to be welcomed as a daughter, not just an outsider. Her in-laws seemed kind, smiling often, asking her about her day, and showing her around their home with pride. It felt warm, and she thought she had been blessed with people who truly cared. The dinners became a tradition, every weekend or special occasion. She and her husband would visit the in-laws' house. The table was always set beautifully, filled with steaming dishes and the aroma of spices that filled the rooms. Her mother-in-law would call her into the kitchen to help with the smaller things, slaying out the plates, passing the bread, or carrying the salad. She enjoyed these little moments because they made her feel included, as if she were slowly being accepted into the family circle. At the dinner table, conversations were lively. Her father-in-law would tell old stories, her brother-in-law would joke and laugh, and her mother-in-law would proudly describe each dish she had cooked. The woman felt happy to sit there, smiling, listening, and enjoying the food. In those moments, she thought she was building memories she would cherish forever. Every laugh, every smile, every warm dish placed in front of her made her believe she had found her second home. In the beginning, she felt truly cared for. Whenever she complimented the food, her mother-in-law would beam with pride, urging her to eat more. "You're too thin. Have another plate," she would say. Her husband would laugh and agree, encouraging her to enjoy herself. And she did. She ate heartily, enjoying the dishes, grateful for the effort and love she believed were being put into every meal. After dinner, she would often help clear the table. Her mother-in-law would smile softly and say, "No, you're our guest," but the woman insisted. Wanting to show respect, they would sometimes sit together afterward, sipping tea, talking about life, about family traditions, about little things that made the woman feel like she was slowly becoming part of them. For her, these dinners were not just about food. They were about belonging, about weaving herself into the fabric of her husband's family. She often told her friends how lucky she felt. "My in-laws are so sweet," she would say. "They really treat me like their own." Her friends smiled, some envious, others relieved that she was happy, and she was, at least, in those early days. Everything seemed perfect. She felt as though she had stepped into a life where family meant love, where dinners meant laughter, and where she could finally relax into her new role. The house itself felt comforting. The smell of cooking greeted her every time she stepped inside. The clinking of dishes, the sound of laughter, and the cozy living room where they gathered after meals made her feel safe. She would look around the table at everyone smiling and eating together, and her heart would fill with gratitude. She thought to herself, this is what family should feel like. Even her husband seemed at ease there. He would slip into his childhood role, joking with his parents, teasing his siblings, laughing louder than he did anywhere else. She loved watching him like that, surrounded by the people who raised him. She thought it was a blessing that she could be part of those moments. She imagined future years, children running around the table, more dinners, more celebrations, a life full of togetherness during those first few months. She truly believed she was accepted. She worked hard to show respect, to follow their customs, to smile even when she was tired, because she wanted to prove she was worthy of their love. And in return, she believed they were showing her affection. Through these meals, each bite of food felt like a gesture of kindness, every invitation to dinner like a reminder that she belonged. Looking back, those evenings were golden in her memory at the time. She didn't notice the subtle glances, the whispered exchanges, or the slightly forced smiles that appeared when she wasn't looking. She didn't sense any shadows in the warmth. She only saw what she wanted to see: family, care, love, and acceptance. Her heart was open, and her trust was whole. She had no reason to question the food served to her. No reason to doubt the hands that offered her plate after plate with gentle smiles. For her, this was the happy beginning, a chapter filled with laughter, good food, and the promise of love. She never imagined then that the same dinners she treasured so much would one day become the very reason for her pain. At the start, everything was simple, innocent, and hopeful. The dinners were not just meals, they were symbols of unity. But soon, what began as the happiest part of her new life would turn into the darkest mystery she had ever faced. T first. The woman thought nothing of it. The dinners at her in-laws' house were filled with laughter, delicious food, and warm conversations. But slowly, she began to notice something unusual. It started small, almost unnoticeable. After one of the dinners, on her way home with her husband, she felt a little uneasy in her stomach. She told herself it must be because she ate too much. Or maybe the food was too rich, after all. Family meals were always full of heavy dishes, full of spices, butter, and cream. She smiled through the discomfort, telling herself it was nothing. But then it happened again, the next time they visited. For dinner, she returned home with the same uneasy feeling. This time it was stronger. She felt nausea, her head felt heavy, and her body weak. She lay in bed, unable to sleep properly. Her husband told her it was probably stress, maybe from trying too hard to impress his family. She nodded, though in her heart she wasn't sure. As weeks passed, the pattern became harder to ignore. Every time she ate at her in-laws' house, she would fall sick. Sometimes it was mild nausea. Other times, it was severe stomach pain that left her curled up in bed. The strange thing was that outside those dinners, she felt completely fine. Her health was normal when she ate at home, at restaurants, or with friends. The sickness came only after eating her in-laws' meals. At first, she kept her thoughts to herself. She didn't want to sound ungrateful or suspicious. Her in-laws seemed so kind, and she didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. She told herself it must be a coincidence. Maybe she was sensitive to certain spices. Or maybe her body wasn't used to their cooking style. She drank herbal tea, took medicine, and brushed it aside, convincing herself it was nothing serious. But deep down, a small voice inside her began to whisper, "Why only at their house?" The thought lingered in her mind, refusing to go away, each time she sat at their table. She found herself glancing at the dishes a little differently. The food looked delicious, smelled wonderful. But a shadow of doubt followed every bite. Her husband noticed her hesitation one evening as they sat down for dinner. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. She shook her head quickly and forced a smile. "Nothing, just not too hungry today." But he could see she was uneasy afterward. When she grew ill again that night, she finally confessed her worries. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "Every time I eat there, I get sick. But when I eat anywhere else, I'm fine." He frowned, dismissing her words with a laugh. "You're just overthinking," he said. "My mom's food is perfectly fine. Maybe you just eat too much too fast." You know how she insists everyone keeps eating. She wanted to believe him, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. The sickness wasn't in her mind, it was real. And it was getting worse each time. The next few dinners became harder for her. She sat at the table with a polite smile, but inside she was nervous. Her stomach tightened before she even took the first bite. She tried to eat smaller portions, but no matter how little she ate, the sickness followed her home. Each night was the same cycle: pain, nausea, weakness, and restless sleep. She began to dread the invitations. What once had felt like joyful gatherings now filled her with quiet fear. She found excuses to eat less, telling her in-laws she wasn't very hungry. But her mother-in-law always pushed her. "Eat, eat more. You need strength," she would say with a smile that sometimes felt a little too forced. The woman obeyed, not wanting to appear rude, but each bite felt heavier than the last. Knowing what awaited her later, her friends noticed the change in her too. She no longer spoke about her in-laws with the same excitement. When they asked, she admitted carefully, "I don't know why, but I keep getting sick after their dinners." Her friends raised eyebrows. Some told her it might just be the food being too oily or rich. Others exchanged worried looks, but didn't say much. She herself didn't want to say out loud the fear growing in her heart. The first signs were subtle, but powerful enough to shake her trust. A once happy tradition was becoming a source of dread. She began to wonder if she should see a doctor. But then again, how could she explain that she only felt sick at her in-laws' dinners? She imagined the doctor laughing, telling her it was stress. Still, the idea gnawed at her. Each time she entered the in-laws' home, she looked more carefully now. She noticed the way dishes were passed to her first, the way her mother-in-law watched as she took the first bite. She noticed the way her husband's plate always looked slightly different, maybe a bigger portion, maybe served from a different part of the pot. It could have been nothing, but in her mind, everything became a clue. The woman tried her best to silence her doubts, but the human heart is rarely quiet when something feels wrong. Each visit to her in-laws' house made her more uneasy. Each dinner filled her with silent questions, and each night afterward left her with the same painful answer, her body falling weak, her stomach twisting, her sleep broken by sickness. At first, she wanted to believe her husband. She wanted to trust his words when he said she was overthinking. Maybe she was sensitive. Maybe her nerves were making her sick. But the voice inside her whispered louder with each dinner. This was not coincidence. The pattern was too sharp, too precise, too undeniable. She began to pay closer attention. Every detail at the dinner table seemed to matter now. When her mother-in-law served food, she noticed how her own plate was always filled first. And filled generously. "Eat, eat more," her mother-in-law urged with a smile. But sometimes that smile seemed tight, almost forced. And the way her eyes lingered on her plate made the woman's heart beat faster with unease. Her suspicion deepened when she compared her plate to her husband's. His servings often looked different, less sauce, a different piece of meat, sometimes even a dish passed to him from another bowl. She couldn't prove it, but it gnawed at her. Why were their plates never quite the same? One evening, while the family laughed and ate, she decided to test something quietly. She reached for a serving spoon and tried to help herself from the main dish instead of waiting to be served. But before she could, her mother-in-law gently intercepted. "No, no, dear. Let me serve you. You're a guest. You must be looked after." Her tone was sweet, but her hand was firm as she took the spoon away. The woman smiled politely, but inside, her suspicion sharpened. Why did her mother-in-law insist on serving her plate every single time? After dinner, as always, the sickness returned. This time, it was worse. She spent the night clutching her stomach, whispering to herself that something wasn't right. The next morning, pale and exhausted, she looked at her husband. "Please, don't you see the pattern?" she asked softly. "Every single time we eat there, I get sick. Only there, nowhere else." He sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. "You're imagining things. My parents would never harm you. They love you. You need to stop doubting them." His words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they made her feel alone. She wanted him to stand beside her, to at least acknowledge her pain. But instead, he chose to defend his parents, leaving her with doubts that grew heavier. Then her sickness, her growing suspicion, became a secret she carried alone. She didn't tell her friends anymore. She didn't press her husband further. She only watched quietly, carefully, like a detective in her own life. Each dinner was no longer about enjoying food or laughter. It was about observing, noticing, searching for clues. She began to notice the way her mother-in-law's eyes flickered when she hesitated to eat, the way her father-in-law sometimes looked away too quickly when she complained of feeling sick, the way the laughter at the table sometimes felt too loud, as if covering something else. The house that once felt warm now felt like a stage, and she the unwilling star of a play she did not understand. Her body, too, became her witness. The symptoms were always the same: nausea, weakness, sharp stomach pains, and sometimes even fever. It was too consistent, too exact to be chance. She began keeping mental notes. I ate this dish and I felt this way. The evidence, though invisible, piled up in her mind until it was impossible to ignore. One evening, she decided to eat very little. Just a few spoonfuls of rice and bread. Avoiding the richer dishes served to her, her mother-in-law noticed. "Why so little? You don't like it?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of pressure. The woman smiled and replied gently, "No, I just don't feel very hungry tonight." That night, her sickness was milder. Her suspicion grew stronger. The less she ate, the better she felt. The pattern was no longer just a whisper in her heart. It was a truth demanding to be seen. She began to dread the invitations, but she could never say no. Her husband insisted they go. It's family, he would remind her, and so she went, wearing her polite smile. Sitting at the table while her heart raced with quiet dread. Every bite felt heavier, not just with food, but with questions. Why is this happening? Who is behind it? Is it carelessness or something worse? The woman's suspicion began to spill into her daily life. At work, she found herself distracted, replaying dinners in her mind. At home, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, pale and tired, wondering how long she could endure. Even in her dreams, the dinner table haunted her, plates of food turning into shadows that chased her through the night. Her love for her husband made it harder. She wanted to believe him when he said his parents loved her. She wanted to believe she was safe in their home, but her body told her otherwise. And bodies, she knew, don't lie. The turning point came one night when she overheard a whisper. She had gone to the kitchen to fetch a glass of water while the others sat in the living room. As she passed the doorway, she heard her mother-in-law's voice. Low but sharp, "She must eat. Don't let her skip." The words froze her in place. Her heart thudded in her chest. She stepped back quietly, unnoticed. The suspicion that had lived in her mind now settled into certainty in her heart. This was not coincidence. It was deliberate. She returned to the living room with her glass of water, her face calm, but her soul trembling. She sat among them, smiling faintly, nodding at their words, but inside, she was no longer the same. Her suspicion was no longer just growing, it was alive. It had taken root, and it demanded answers. That night, as she lay awake in bed, she whispered to herself, "I need proof. I need to know the truth." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Her body was weak, but her spirit was beginning to harden. The happy beginning was long gone, replaced now with suspicions so heavy it colored every thought. Every future dinner would no longer be about food or family, would be about survival and truth. The woman's suspicion grew like a shadow that followed her everywhere. But what hurt her most was not the sickness, not even the uneasy glances at the dinner table. It was her husband's doubt. He was the one person she hoped would understand, the one she believed would stand beside her. Yet every time she tried to open her heart to him, she was met with disbelief. One evening, after another painful night of nausea and weakness, she sat on the edge of their bed, pale and trembling. Her husband walked in, worry flickering in his eyes. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure it isn't something else?" he asked softly. "Maybe you should see a doctor." She looked at him, her voice tired but steady. "It only happens at your parents' house, only after eating there. Nowhere else." She wanted her words to sink into him, to make him pause and see the truth. But instead, he sighed and shook his head. "You're making too much out of this. My mother loves you. My family would never hurt you." The woman felt her chest tighten. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them, full of certainty. Full of blind trust, he was protecting his family, but in doing so, he was leaving her unprotected. She wanted to cry out, "But I am your family too." Instead, she swallowed her pain, her silence heavier than tears as the weeks went by. She tried again and again to explain. Each time, her husband grew more frustrated. "You're being paranoid," he said once, his voice rising. "You're letting your imagination ruin your peace." Another time, when she begged him to notice the difference in their plates, he laughed bitterly. "You're comparing portions now. Do you realize how ridiculous this sounds?" Each word was like a knife cutting into her trust. She had married him, believing he would be her safe place. But now, in the very moments she needed him most, he was pulling away, choosing loyalty. To his parents over faith in his wife, the woman's heart ached with loneliness. At dinners, she forced smiles and polite words, while inside, she carried the heavy burden of doubt. She wanted to reach across the table, to look into her husband's eyes, to see just one flicker of belief. But his laughter with his family drowned her voice. His ease at the table only deepened her sense of isolation. One night, after another argument, she sat alone in their kitchen, staring at the cup of tea in her hands. Her husband had gone to bed angry, his words still echoing in the air. "Stop blaming my parents. You're imagining things. Do you know how insulting this sounds?" She whispered into the silence. "I'm not imagining it," but no one was there to hear her. Her doubt in herself began to grow. Was she wrong? Was it truly in her head? Could her body be betraying her with fear instead of food? The sickness was real, her body told her that, but her husband's disbelief planted seeds of confusion. Maybe she was weak. Maybe she was sensitive. Maybe she was indeed imagining patterns that didn't exist. Yet each time she sat at the in-laws' table, those doubts melted away. The unease in her stomach came before the food even touched her lips. Her mother-in-law's insistent gaze, her father-in-law's silence. The way dishes were placed in front of her was too deliberate, too strange. She knew, deep down, that this was no accident. But how could she convince her husband? He saw his parents through the eyes of a son, through years of love and trust. To him, they could do no wrong. To him, they were his foundation. And now, she was asking him to question that foundation, to see cracks where he only saw strength. One evening, she tried again. They sat in the living room, the television flickering in the background. She reached for his hand, her voice trembling. "Please, just once. Believe me, watch carefully next time. See how my plate is different. See how it happens only to me." He pulled his hand away gently, frustration in his eyes. "Enough," he said firmly. "You're turning this into something ugly. My parents welcomed you. They treat you well, and this is how you repay them. With suspicion, with accusations." Eyes filled with tears. She wanted to scream. "This is not an accusation. It's my pain." But the words caught in her throat. Her silence was mistaken for guilt. Her tears mistaken for weakness. She realized then that convincing him would not be easy. His heart was closed. Not out of cruelty, but out of blind devotion to the people who had raised him. The distance between them grew. She still loved him deeply, but love without trust is fragile, and hers was beginning to crack. She lay awake at night beside him, wondering if he would ever see the truth, wondering if he would ever choose her side, wondering if she was destined to fight this battle alone. Yet, in the quiet of those nights, a spark of determination grew. His doubt hurt her, but it also fueled her resolve. If he would not see the truth, she would find a way to show him. If he would not believe her words, she would bring him proof. She whispered to herself, "One day, he will know." The woman began to plan. Quietly, secretly, she knew she couldn't argue with her husband. Any more arguments only drove them further apart. Instead, She decided to gather evidence, not in anger, but in patience, if the sickness was real. If the pattern was true, she would find a way to reveal it beyond denial. Her husband's doubt had wounded her, but it had also sharpened her will. She loved him too much to let bitterness win. But she loved herself too much to let silence kill her. She knew the truth was waiting, and when it came, it would break not just the illusion at the dinner table, but the walls of disbelief that stood between them. For now, she carried the weight of his doubt on her shoulders. But inside, she was no longer just a victim. She was preparing herself for the moment when truth would speak louder than suspicion. Louder than loyalty, louder even than love. The woman had reached her limit. The sickness, the whispered doubts, the loneliness of carrying suspicion on her shoulders, it was too much. Each dinner left her weaker. Each argument with her husband left her more broken, but deep inside, her spirit was no longer just wounded. It was sharpening, preparing itself for action. She knew she could not go on like this. She needed to take control. Her husband's doubt had forced her into silence. But silence had also given her time to think. If words could not convince him, then proof would. She whispered to herself late at night. Next time, I will know the truth. Her plan was simple, yet bold. She would bring her own dish. Cooked by her own hands, untouched by anyone else, it would be her silent test. Her secret weapon against the mystery that haunted her. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Her mother-in-law called one afternoon with her usual cheerful tone. "Dinner this Sunday. Everyone will be here. Don't be late, dear." The woman hesitated, but then agreed politely. Her heart raced, knowing this would be the night. On Sunday morning, she woke early, the house still quiet. She moved to the kitchen, pulling out ingredients with steady hands. She decided to cook something simple yet filling. A dish she loved and trusted, as she chopped vegetables and stirred the pot. She felt a strange sense of control return to her. For weeks, she had been at the mercy of her in-laws' food. Tonight, she would take her power back. When her husband walked in, curious about the aroma, she smiled faintly. "I thought I'd bring something to share tonight." Just to contribute, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Perhaps he was relieved that she was trying harder to bond with his family. Perhaps he believed this was her way of letting go of her doubts. He didn't question her, and she didn't explain further. That evening, they arrived at his parents' home. The familiar smell of spices filled the air, dishes already steaming on the table. Her mother-in-law welcomed them with her usual smile. But when she noticed the dish in the woman's hands, her smile faltered for just a moment. It was a small flicker, but the woman saw it. She filed it away quietly in her heart. "Oh, you cooked something?" her mother-in-law asked sweetly, taking the dish from her hands. "How thoughtful. You really didn't need to." "I wanted to," the woman replied gently, her eyes calm but sharp. The dinner began as usual. Plates filled, laughter echoing, stories told. But tonight, the woman played her role carefully. She ate only from her own dish, politely declining when her mother-in-law tried to serve her. "I'll just have some of what I brought," she said with a smile. Her mother-in-law's eyes lingered on her longer than usual, but she said nothing. Her husband, unaware of the test, ate happily from the other dishes, joking with his siblings, laughing at old family stories. The woman, however, focused only on her plate. Every bite a quiet act of defiance. She ate slowly, calmly, but avoided everything else on the table. The food was delicious. But more than that, it was safe because it was hers. The evening went on, and she remained alert, watching carefully, noticing the tension in her mother-in-law's forced smiles, the quick glances exchanged between her in-laws, the silence that seemed to fall when she reached only for her own dish. It was as though her small act of independence had unsettled the unspoken rhythm of the table. After dinner, they sat in the living room, as always, tea served, conversations flowing. The woman kept her smile, responding politely, but inside her heart was pounding. Would it happen again? Would she fall sick tonight like before? She waited, silently measuring the hours when they finally returned home. She braced herself for the familiar sickness. She prepared for the twisting pain, the nausea, the weakness that had become her routine. But the night passed, and nothing came, for the first time in months. She lay in bed without clutching her stomach. She drifted into sleep peacefully, her body free of the suffering she had come to dread. The next morning, she woke up refreshed. Stronger, lighter, her heart raced with the realization her suspicion had been right all along. It was not her imagination. It was not stress. It was not coincidence. Something in her in-laws' food was making her sick, and by eating only from her own dish. She had proven it. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her cup of tea. Her husband walked in, surprised to see her smiling. "You're feeling better today?" he asked. "Yes." She replied softly. "Much better." Her words carried double meaning. But he didn't catch it. He smiled back, relieved, while she sat in silence, knowing she now held the truth. But truth is not always comforting. With proof came fear. If it wasn't coincidence, if it wasn't her imagination, then what was it? Was it negligent, sturdy cooking? Spoiled ingredients, or was it something darker? Was it intentional? Her heart tightened at the thought. She didn't want to believe her in-laws could harbor such malice. But the evidence pointed in only one direction. As days passed, she replayed the dinner in her mind. The faltering smile of her mother-in-law, the forced cheer of her father-in-law, the uneasy glances that passed across the table. She saw everything more clearly now. Every small detail that once seemed harmless now appeared suspicious, and her husband's doubt, though still painful, mattered less because now she had proof for herself. The turning point had come quietly, without argument, without shouting, without accusations. One simple act, bringing her own dish, had changed everything. It had given her clarity. And clarity was power. For the first time in months, she no longer felt helpless. She had taken control, and in doing so, she had uncovered the truth. Yet, with that truth came the heavy weight of choice. What should she do now? Should she confront her husband? Should she reveal what she knew to his family? Should she protect herself silently, bringing her own dish each time? Or should she dig deeper to uncover exactly what they were doing and why? The answers did not come easily, but one thing was clear: the happy beginning was gone forever. The shadow she had once doubted was now real, and it would never leave until she faced it fully. The turning point was not just about food. It was about trust, about betrayal, about survival. And though she still smiled politely in front of her husband and his family, deep inside she knew that the story was no longer about dinners. It was about uncovering the truth that hid behind them. The woman had uncovered a truth, but it was a fragile truth, one that lived only in her heart. She knew it wasn't enough to feel better after eating her own dish one time. If she wanted to be sure, she wanted to silence her husband's doubts and her own lingering questions. She needed proof that could not be denied. She needed to repeat the test. Days passed. And once again, the familiar call came from her mother-in-law. "Dinner this weekend." The voice said warmly over the phone. "Everyone will be here. You must come." The woman agreed politely, but inside her chest, her heart pounded. This was the chance she had been waiting for. The chance to test her theory again on the morning of the dinner. She stood in her kitchen, carefully preparing another dish. This time, she chose something she knew her in-laws liked, so there would be no reason for them to question her intentions. Her hands moved with determination as she chopped, stirred, and seasoned. Every step felt like a shield, every ingredient a piece of her plan. Her husband walked in, curious again. "You're cooking for tonight?" he asked. "That's 2 times in a row. They'll think you're trying to outdo Mom." His tone was light, teasing, but she smiled faintly and said, "I just want to help." He chuckled and kissed her forehead. "You're sweet then." He walked away, unaware of the storm that raged quietly inside her when they arrived that evening. Her mother-in-law opened the door with her usual smile, but once again, the woman noticed the slight hesitation when she saw the dish in her hands. It was small, but it was there. The flicker of something that wasn't quite joy. How thoughtful. Her mother-in-law said quickly, taking the dish, "You really shouldn't work so hard." "I enjoy it," the woman replied softly, her eyes steady. The dinner table was laid out as always, dishes steaming, aromas filling the air. Laughter and chatter filling the silence, but the woman's focus was sharp. Tonight, she would test her truth again. Tonight, she would eat only from her own dish. When her mother-in-law tried to serve her from the main bowl, she gently stopped. Her with a smile, "I'll just have some of what I brought. I don't want it to go to waste," she explained. Her mother-in-law's eyes lingered for a moment, searching her face, but then she nodded and moved on. The woman caught a quick glance exchanged between her in-laws. Subtle but unmistakable, her heart tightened. Throughout the evening, she ate quietly, listening to conversations, smiling when necessary. But her mind was on her body. She knew her body would tell her the truth again. Her husband ate happily, complimenting his mother's food. His siblings joked. Her father-in-law spoke about work. It all looked normal, but beneath the surface, the woman felt the tension. The dinner ended, and as they sat in the living room drinking tea, the woman pretended to relax, but inside she was waiting, counting the hours. Would the sickness come? Would her body betray her again? That night, when they returned home, she waited. The hours passed slowly. She braced herself for the familiar twisting pain, for the nausea, for the weakness that left her trembling. But once again, nothing came. Her stomach remained calm, her body strong. She slept through the night peacefully, waking the next morning refreshed and certain. Her heart raced with both relief and dread. The test had confirmed it. It was undeniable now. The sickness was not in her mind, not a coincidence, not stress. The sickness lived only at that dinner table and only in the food prepared by her. In-laws, for the next few weeks, she repeated her test carefully. Each time she cooked a dish and brought it along. Each time she ate only from her own portion. Each time she returned home without sickness, and each time the truth grew heavier. Sharper, impossible to ignore. Her husband noticed her improved health. "See? I told you it was nothing," he said one morning as they prepared breakfast together. "You're fine now? It was probably just stress before." He smiled, relieved. But she said nothing. How could she explain that her silence was not surrender, but strategy? How could she tell him the truth when he still refused to see it? Her silence became her shield. She didn't argue with him anymore. She didn't press her suspicion. Instead, she collected proof for herself, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment, but with every dinner. The atmosphere in her in-laws' house grew more tense. They noticed her habit of eating only from her own dish. They smiled politely, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Her mother-in-law pressed her. "Why don't you try this? It's your favorite." Her voice, sweet but sharp. The woman smiled and shook her head gently. Maybe later, inside, she felt the weight of every glance, every forced laugh, every silent question that hung in the air. She knew they were watching her as carefully as she was watching them. It had become a quiet battle, fought not with words, but with food and silence. The more she tested, the stronger her resolve became. But so did her fear. What if her suspicion was darker than she imagined? What if it wasn't spoiled food or negligence, but something deliberate? The thought made her chest tighten. She didn't want to believe her in-laws could harbor such cruelty. Yet, the evidence pointed in only one direction. The test gave her the proof she needed, but it also raised questions she wasn't ready to face. Why? Why would they do this to her? What did they hope to gain? Was it resentment, jealousy, hatred, hidden beneath polite smiles. The answers remained hidden, but the truth of her sickness was no longer a mystery. The woman had taken her power back, quietly and carefully. Her test had worked, but she also knew this was only the beginning. The time for silence was ending. Soon she would have to confront the truth directly, and when she did, nothing would ever be the same again. The woman had proven to herself that the sickness came only from her in-laws' food. But proof alone was not enough. Each dinner she attended made her more certain, and yet also more restless. Why? Why was this happening? Why would her husband's family, who smiled so warmly and spoke so kindly, cause her such harm? The question haunted her every night, lying awake beside her sleeping husband. Staring into the darkness, her heart needed answers, even if those answers broke her. The opportunity for discovery came one evening unexpectedly. It was her father-in-law's birthday, and, as usual, the family gathered at the house. The table was filled with dishes, candles, and laughter. Her husband sat happily among his siblings, clinking glasses, sharing stories. The woman, however, carried her plan silently in her heart. She had decided this would be the night she looked deeper. She had brought her own dish, as she always did now, and she ate only from it. Smiling politely when her mother-in-law insisted she'd try something else. Later, she said sweetly, her tone calm. Her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed for just a moment, then softened into a smile. The woman felt a chill run down her spine. As the evening went on, the woman excused herself to fetch water from the kitchen. She walked quietly, her steps light, as she entered the kitchen. She froze, for there, by the counter, her mother-in-law stood with a small bottle in her hand. The label was partly hidden, but the woman could see enough to know it was not salt, not spice, not anything meant for cooking. Her mother-in-law poured a small amount into one of the serving bowls, stirring quickly before placing the bottle back into the cupboard. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard. She stepped back into the shadows. Unseen, her body trembled. She had suspected. But seeing it with her own eyes was different. It was no longer suspicion, no longer a whisper in her mind. It was truth, cold and merciless. She returned to the table slowly, her face calm, though her insides screamed. She sat down, her hands folded neatly, her eyes on her plate. She felt every muscle in her body tense as her in-laws served food to everyone else. Her husband ate happily. Unaware, she watched him, terrified. For the first time, would the tainted food harm him too? But no, just as she had noticed before, his plate looked slightly different. Served from a separate portion, it struck her then with cruel clarity. This was not random, not careless cooking. It was deliberate, calculated, and it was aimed at her alone. The woman swallowed hard, her throat dry. She forced a smile when her husband looked at her. She pushed down the fear, the anger, the shock. She ate only from her own dish as planned, but every bite felt heavier now. Every glance from her in-laws felt sharper. Their laughter rang false in her ears that night when they returned home. She lay awake, her mind replaying the scene in the kitchen over and over, the bottle, the powder slipping into the food. Her mother-in-law's calm movements, the careful separation of plates. It was all clear now, too clear. She turned to look at her husband, sleeping peacefully beside her, and her heart ached with both love and fear. He trusted his family blindly, but how could she tell him this truth? Would he believe her now, or would he call her paranoid again, even with her discovery? The next morning, she returned to her kitchen. She opened the cupboards and looked at the spices lined neatly in rows. For the first time, they felt sinister. Reminders of what she had seen. She sat at the table, her tea untouched. Her hands shook slightly as she whispered to herself, "Why me? What have I done?"